Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know I love a good deep dive, and you guys sent in an article that is just begging for one.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
Bitcoin hitting $75,000 as the election results come in. I mean, what?
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there for sure.
Absolutely.
So let's dive in. First off, this article, it's all about Bitcoin's wild ride during this crazy election.
Yeah, and not just Bitcoin either, right? We saw Coinbase and MicroStrategy jumping too.
Oh yeah, they definitely got swept up in all the excitement.
It's like the whole market was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen.
And then, boom, Bitcoin explodes, breaks its previous record, and everyone's trying to figure out why.
Right.
Was it just Trump taking that early lead in the Electoral College?
Well, that's certainly part of it. I mean, even before those swing states were called, the market seemed to be reacting to the possibility of a Trump win.
Like they were predicting he'd be good news for Bitcoin.
Exactly. But to really get a sense of what happened here, we need to look beyond just this one election.
Oh, so there's more to it than just Trump versus Harris.
Yeah, a lot more. We've actually seen Bitcoin have these huge returns in the 90 days after every presidential election since 2012.
Really? That's interesting. I didn't realize it was that consistent.
It is, and it has people wondering, is there something about elections that just gets Bitcoin going?
That's a good question. What are some of the theories out there?
Well, some analysts think it's tied to the Bitcoin halving cycles. You know, those happen roughly every 4 years, too.
Right.
So they think maybe those two events happening around the same time create this kind of perfect storm for Bitcoin's price.
Interesting. Anything else?
Others point to the Federal Reserve and how they tend to adjust interest rates after elections.
Ah, so maybe it's more about the overall economic policies that come into play after a new president takes office?
Exactly. It's this complex interplay of factors. But the pattern is there, and it's pretty clear that elections have a significant impact on Bitcoin.
Okay, so past elections have been good for Bitcoin, but this time felt different, almost electric, like everyone was extra on edge.
Oh, absolutely. And the article really highlights those contrasting views on Trump and Harris.
Like two completely different visions for the future of crypto.
Exactly. On the one hand, you had Trump sort of positioning himself as the pro-crypto candidate.
Right, all over social media, engaging with the crypto community.
Exactly. And the market seemed to be betting on him continuing that stance if he won. Less regulation, maybe even some favorable policies.
So a Trump win was seen as bullish for Bitcoin. Got it. But what about Harris? Was she really viewed as a threat to crypto?
Well, there are definitely concerns. The article mentions a lot of investors worried that a Harris administration would be more likely to crack down on crypto.
Tighter regulations, that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe even trying to rein in Bitcoin's growth in some way. So yeah, there was a lot of anxiety around what a Harris win could mean for the industry.
It sounds like the stakes were pretty high this time around.
No doubt about it.
And even with Trump taking an early lead, the article mentioned that a lot of investors were still being super cautious, taking a wait-and-see approach.
Yeah, why do you think that was? I mean, wouldn't they be excited about a potential Trump win?
Well, remember, nothing was certain on election night. Those swing states could have easily swung the other way.
True, those swing states held a lot of power, and the final outcome was still very much up in the air.
So even with Trump ahead, there was a lot of uncertainty still, not a guaranteed win.
Right. Plus, there's the inherent volatility of Bitcoin itself. I mean, the article quotes one expert predicting massive short-term volatility regardless of who won.
So no matter who took the White House, Bitcoin was in for a wild ride.
Absolutely. This was being called the most important election in the crypto industry's lifetime, and everyone knew it.
The tension must have been palpable.
You can say that again.
All right, so we've got these historical trends, contrasting views on the candidates, and a healthy dose of uncertainty. But what about this whole government deficit situation?
Yes, the elephant in the room.
The article mentioned it jumped to $1.8 trillion in 2024. That's a massive number.
It is. And it definitely fueled a lot of discussion about Bitcoin's potential role as a hedge against inflation.
Right, because when governments rack up huge debts and potentially devalue their currencies, investors start looking for alternative assets.
Exactly. Things that can hold their value even when the dollar might be losing its strength. And that's where Bitcoin comes in.
So in a world where the US dollar might not be as reliable, Bitcoin starts to look pretty appealing.
Right. And that's where this concept of fair value comes into play.
Ah, yes, fair value. The article mentioned that CryptoQuant had pegged Bitcoin's fair value at around $70,000 before the election.
Right.
But I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that means. What is fair value exactly?
No, it's basically what analysts believe an asset is truly worth. based on all sorts of factors, market trends, supply and demand, even things like investor sentiment.
So they're saying that based on all their analysis, $70,000 was a reasonable price for Bitcoin.
Heating up to the election, yeah.
Okay. And the fact that it surged past that point, hitting $75,000, suggests that the election itself was acting as a catalyst,
Yeah.
pushing Bitcoin into uncharted territory.
Exactly. It wasn't just the election itself, but how it interacted with these broader market forces. That created this perfect storm for Bitcoin.
Fascinating. Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and really unpack this whole Bitcoin as an inflation hedge idea. I
Yeah.
think that's a crucial piece of the puzzle here, and I know a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with it.
You're right. It's a key concept to grasp, especially when we're talking about the potential impact of government deficits and economic uncertainty.
So for those of us who aren't economics experts, can you break it down? What does it actually mean for Bitcoin to be an inflation hedge?
Sure. Think of it this way. When inflation rises, the purchasing power of your money decreases. So let's say a loaf of bread costs $2 today.
Hmm.
With high inflation, that same loaf might cost $3 next year.
Meaning your dollar buys you less bread.
Exactly.
Okay, I get that. But how does Bitcoin fit into the picture?
Well, Bitcoin, with its limited supply and decentralized nature, it's seen by many as a store of value, much like gold.
Okay.
The idea is that unlike fiat currency, which can be printed endlessly by governments, Bitcoin is scarce and its value is driven by market forces.
So in a world where governments are printing more money and potentially devaluing their currencies, Bitcoin, with its fixed supply, might hold its value better.
Exactly. That's the theory, at least.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal. So
Mhm.
let's say I'm an investor who's worried about inflation eroding my savings. I'm looking at this election, this huge government deficit, and I'm thinking, maybe Bitcoin is the answer. What should I be considering?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to understand that Bitcoin is still a highly volatile asset. It's not a magic bullet, and there are risks involved. But if you're looking for a potential hedge against inflation, Bitcoin's decentralized nature and limited supply make it an intriguing option.
Okay, so it's not a sure thing, but it's worth considering. What else should I be watching for? Because it sounds like this whole Bitcoin and politics thing is only going to get more intertwined.
You're absolutely right. As Bitcoin's adoption grows, we can expect more regulatory scrutiny and debate, particularly in the US with the SEC.
And how the SEC decides to regulate Bitcoin could have a huge impact on its future.
Absolutely. Stricter regulations could potentially dampen Bitcoin's growth, while clear and well-defined regulations could actually foster more mainstream adoption and investor confidence. It's a balancing act.
Got it. So regulations, global events, and even the political landscape are all playing a role in shaping Bitcoin's future. It's a lot to keep track of.
It certainly is, but that's what makes it such a fascinating space to watch.
Well, before we get into all that, I want to go back to those election night reactions. Because beyond just the overall market movements, there are some pretty specific things happening that I think reveal a lot about where Bitcoin might be headed. Can we dive into those?
Absolutely. I think those details provide some really interesting insights into the psychology of Bitcoin investors and how they view the future.
Perfect. Let's pick that up next time. So we're back and ready to dig into some of those election night specifics. Because beyond the headlines about Bitcoin's surge, there's some really interesting nuances that caught my eye.
Yeah, I think those little details can tell us a lot about what was going on in the minds of investors, what they were thinking and what they might be anticipating in the future.
Exactly. For example, I noticed that Bitcoin's price actually dipped a bit right before the election, then shot up as the results started coming in. It was like a roller coaster.
Oh, that's interesting. That dip right before the results started coming in suggests a lot of investors were hesitant to make any big moves until they had more clarity on the outcome. Remember, this election was being framed as potentially make or break for the crypto industry.
All right, the stakes were high.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it looked like Trump might be pulling ahead, Bitcoin took off. Almost as if the market was collectively exhaling, saying, okay, we might be okay after all.
That's a great way to put it. And it kind of reinforces the idea that a lot of investors were really hoping for a Trump presidency, believing it would be more favorable for Bitcoin.
Right. But it wasn't just about hoping for a crypto-friendly president, was it? There were also some real concerns about what a Harris win could mean for the industry.
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of talk about potential regulations, especially from the SEC, that could have a significant impact on Bitcoin.
I'm curious what kind of regulations were people worried about? Because it feels like the SEC has been pretty hesitant to really crack down on Bitcoin so far.
True, but the landscape is constantly evolving. Some people were concerned about the SEC classifying Bitcoin as a security, which would bring a whole host of new rules and oversight.
And that could potentially limit Bitcoin's growth and innovation.
Potentially, yes. There were also concerns about stricter regulations on crypto exchanges and even the possibility of limiting how individuals can buy and sell Bitcoin.
So for those who saw Bitcoin as this kind of liberating decentralized force in finance, the idea of more government intervention was a big worry.
Exactly. And that's why this election, with its contrasting views on crypto, was so closely watched. It felt like a potential turning point for the industry.
Okay, so we've got these concerns about regulation, we've got investors reacting in real time to election results, and we've got this underlying narrative of Bitcoin as a potential hedge against inflation. It's all starting to come together.
It is, and it really highlights the fact that Bitcoin is no longer this niche digital currency that only a few people know about. It's become a significant player in the global financial landscape, and its future is increasingly intertwined with these larger macroeconomic and political trends.
And speaking of the future, let's talk about what might happen next. Because even though the election is over, the story of Bitcoin is far from finished. What are the key things we should be watching for?
Well, as you mentioned, the regulatory landscape is going to be crucial. How the SEC decides to approach Bitcoin and crypto more broadly will have a significant impact on its adoption and growth.
So for investors, that means paying close attention to any announcements or actions from the SEC regarding Bitcoin?
Absolutely. But it's not just about U.S. regulations. We also need to keep an eye on what's happening globally. Because as Bitcoin becomes more integrated into the global financial system, the actions of other countries will matter too.
Right. It's not just an American story anymore. What else should we be watching for?
Well, technological advancements within the crypto space itself will be key. Things like scalability, transaction speeds, and even the development of new applications for blockchain technology. All of those will play a role in shaping Bitcoin's future.
So it's not just about the price going up or down. It's about the underlying technology evolving and becoming more sophisticated.
Exactly. And finally, we can't forget about the broader economic backdrop. Inflation, interest rates, geopolitical events, these are all factors that can influence investor sentiment and ultimately impact Bitcoin's price.
So it's this complex interplay of technology, regulation, global economics, and even politics that's driving Bitcoin's evolution. It's a lot to keep track of.
It certainly is. But that's what makes it such a fascinating space to be a part of.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the wild ride of election night to the potential impact of regulation and even the intricacies of Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. But I think there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore, the human element.
I agree. Because ultimately, it's people who are driving Bitcoin's adoption, investing their money and shaping its future.
Exactly. So let's dive into that side of things next time. All right, so we're back, and I want to shift gears a bit. We've talked about the market, the election, even the SEC, but what about the everyday people putting their faith and their money into Bitcoin?
You know, it's a great point. Bitcoin isn't just numbers on a screen. It's driven by real people with real beliefs about the future of finance.
Exactly, and I think that's what gets lost sometimes in all the talk of price fluctuations and regulations.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from people on the ground? What's motivating them to invest in Bitcoin?
Well, it's a real mix. Some people are drawn to the technology itself, the idea of a decentralized, transparent financial system. They see Bitcoin as a way to break free from those traditional banks and institutions.
So it's about more than just making money. It's about being part of something bigger, almost a movement.
Right. And then you've got others who are definitely driven by the potential for profit, no doubt. They see Bitcoin as a high-risk, high-reward investment, and they're willing to ride those waves of volatility.
And then there's those who see Bitcoin as a safe haven in uncertain times, like we talked about earlier. They're worried about inflation, government overreach, and they see Bitcoin as a way to protect their wealth.
Exactly. And it's that diversity of motivations, that mix of idealism and pragmatism, that makes the Bitcoin community so fascinating.
It also makes it kind of hard to predict what will happen next, because you've got all these different perspectives, all these different hopes and fears swirling around this one asset.
It's true, and that's why it's so important to understand not just the technology and the market dynamics, but also the human psychology at play. Because ultimately, it's people who are making the decisions to buy, sell, hold, and use Bitcoin.
And those decisions are being shaped by everything from their personal financial goals to their beliefs about the future of society as a whole.
Absolutely. And as Bitcoin continues to evolve and become more integrated into the world, Those human factors are only going to become more important.
So for someone like me, trying to wrap my head around all of this, what's the key takeaway? What's the one thing I should keep in mind as I watch Bitcoin's journey unfold?
I'd say, remember this. Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency. It's a reflection of our collective hopes and anxieties about the future of finance, technology, and even society itself.
It's a mirror to our times, in a way.
Exactly. And as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, Bitcoin will continue to be a powerful force, shaping the world in ways we can't even fully imagine yet.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely feeling a lot more informed and a little bit more in awe of how much this one digital currency has come to represent. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. And for those of you listening out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. The world of Bitcoin is constantly evolving, and this journey is just beginning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.